Welcome in. This is The Metricality, where I don't debate effort. I analyze standards and execution. This is Season 2, Episode 8. This episode is about why Arkansas's season is going downhill. And it starts with something simple. They never really established defensive standards. Not consistently, not enforceably, and not in a way that held up to 40 minutes. This isn't a shooting slump, it's not bad luck, and it's not a talent issue. Over the full season, Arkansas played fast and deep enough to survive, as long as mistakes didn't stack. But without clear standards, mistakes always stack. And the season progressed. Pace increased, rotations tightened, bench leverage disappeared. And without substitution as a corrective tool, there was no way to reset behavior on the floor. So instead of mistake, correction, you get mistake, fatigue, mistake, spiral. That's why defensive ratings collapsed. That's why bench impact vanished. That's why margins ballooned. This isn't about blaming players. In fact, I don't think they're to blame at all. This isn't their responsibility. It's about what happens when standards aren't clear enough to enforce and pace outruns control. Talent still isn't the question. Effort still isn't the debate. This season is sliding because structure never stabilized. Let's get into it. Before we talk about individual plays or effort or single game moments or even individual games, we have to talk about the profile shift because that's where the season actually broke. Over the full season, Arkansas had a very clear statistical identity. They played fast, they played deep, and on paper, they looked defensively viable. Here's what that full season profile looked like. Pace at 75.4 possessions, about the 95th percentile nationally. Defensive rating at 98.6. Top 25 caliber by the numbers. Bench production at 27.3 points per game. That is elite. Elite nationally, elite for the SEC. Turnover rate at 18.9%. Higher than I would like and probably they would like, but manageable. And a net rating hovering around even. But here's the important correction. That defensive profile wasn't built on enforced standards. It was surviving on activity, depth, and pace. There was never consistent enforcement of posture, containment, or ball side and help side discipline. So the margin for error was always thin. And that gets me thinking back to the SMU and Arkansas State losses. On paper, going in, they had better efficiency, they had better offense. They should have won those games. But again, the margin for error was always thin because of that. So now let's look at the last 5 games. The pace went up to 77.1 possessions, basically top 1% nationally. And with that increased pace, the defensive rating jumped to 114.1. It went from top 25 caliber by the numbers to bottom tier basketball. Bench scoring was cut almost in half to 14 points per game. They were at 27.3. They are now at 14 points per game for bench scoring. Turnover rate also climbed to 20.4%. And the net rating collapsed to minus 29. So with that pace increase, we also had defensive rating jump, we had turnover rate climbed, and net rating collapsed. And at the same time, they also stopped utilizing their bench. That's not a slump. That's not bad luck. That's what happens when a team plays faster than its standards can support. This isn't a shooting problem, it's a system failure. When defensive standards aren't enforced, pace doesn't create pressure, it exposes weakness. And once rotation tighten, there's no mechanisms left to correct behavior on the court. And that is different from the effort that people are putting in. The biggest red flag here is bench collapse without bench failure. Here's the part people miss if they're only looking at box scores. Bench wasn't the problem. In fact, the bench was productive when it was utilized. Over the full season, as I just mentioned, Arkansas was getting 27.3 points per game from the bench, elite production, and that number has dipped to 14 points per game for the last 5 games. At first glance, that looks like, well, maybe it's a bench failure. It isn't. Because bench efficiency didn't really crater. The minutes did. So here's the contradiction. The bench didn't stop producing. It stopped being emphasized and utilized as much as it could be. The rotation tightened, even as starter effectiveness declined. And what I mean by that is they're now playing at a higher pace. We have some players that are playing 38 minutes, basically close to the full game, and they get tired. So, of course, their effectiveness is going to decline in a late game. Late third and fourth is where we saw it in this last game. Same with the LSU, it was third and fourth. This isn't a personal problem. It's a usage decision. When the bench is reduced to short reactive stints, when players don't know how long they'll be in, if bench players make 1 or 2 mistakes and it brings them out, you're not going to get rhythm. You get hesitation. And hesitation kills bench scoring faster than missed shots ever will. When the bench isn't trusted with real minutes, starters lose the threat of being subbed. And it's really not a threat. But they need subs, and it really matters for 2 reasons. First, accountability disappears. Basketball is a tough game. It gets physical. No one is perfect. Mistakes are going to happen. I see Asia Wilson could easily argue she's the GOAT of the WNBA. I've seen her make mistakes. Say NBA, college, it doesn't matter where you go, there are going to be mistakes. But when you have costly mistakes that are starting to stack on top of each other and they don't cost minutes, there's no in-game mechanism to correct behavior and stop a spiral. So if we have a player who allows back-to-back 2 straight line drives, points, and then tries to come and fix the issue themselves and just do a fast drive, fast play that's a low IQ move, they have to be taken out. Not for the full game, no one's saying that. They just need a reset. Because we can't have the mistakes keep stacking on each other, and this is what's happening with Arkansas. Arkansas is extremely momentum fragile. If they have 1 turnover, if they have 1 mistake, it's likely to cause a turnover in the next. There's a clear pattern to it. Second, here, I said it matters for 2 reasons. The first was accountability disappears. The second is fatigue sets in. They're playing at a higher pace, 1% nationally. Heavy minutes don't just wear down your legs. They slow reactions, they delay reads, and they turn closeouts into reaches. That's when defensive mistakes stop being isolated and start stacking. And you especially get fatigued when you have help side players who are moving their head rapidly back and forth between the ball and their player. That increases their fatigue. When they have to run for those late closeouts because they are ball watching on help side and they have their back turned to a 3-point shooter. So they're going to it's going to be a snowball effect. So the issue just isn't the bench isn't playing, it's that without the bench, you lose both enforcement and really the ability to reset when I'm saying that. Because players need a reset. You know, if an individual player is stacking mistakes on each other, the bench isn't a punishment. They just need a reset. They can come back in again. But without that bench, we're losing both that enforcement or reset and energy. And once that happens, pace doesn't pressure the opponent anymore. It exposes your own cracks. This is where the conversation turns structural. Once two players are pushing 38 minutes at this pace, the coaching staff loses leverage. It's not theoretical. When two players are near full game minutes and the pace stays up, top 1% nationally, you lose some very specific tools. You lose the ability to sit a player after defensive mistakes, such as when one player, I'm not going to mention, had their back and left a player open in the right corner who shot, I believe it was 50% or higher from that right corner, and they had two very late closeouts. The second, in same possession, the second one was a jump. And then they start trying to fix it themselves on offense, and then they make mistakes on offense. They have to come out. You lose the ability to sit a player out after those defensive misses so they can reset. You lose the ability to reset the standards again. You lose the flexibility to change the matchup. At the beginning, Arkansas needs stability. If the game offensively becomes stagnant, they're going to want to put different players in to raise that offensive ceiling. And you lose the chance to stop runs before they stack. If the same players are allowed to make the same mistakes over and over again, you're not going to stop runs. That's the moment the game stops being coached possession to possession and starts being survived. And you can't play a game in the SEC just surviving and expect to win. Instead of mistake, or mistake, in a lot of cases sub-correction, you get mistake, fatigue, mistake, spiral. And you can see that spiral clearly. Late third scoring runs, repeated straight line drives by the same matchup, same player allowing it, defensive rating spikes that don't stabilize, turnovers clustering. They're not random, they're very sequential. They have a clear pattern to them. It's not players melting down, it's not players changing their effort or their talent suddenly going away. It's what happens when they are tired and when enforcement tools are gone. The next part is an important reframe. Arkansas's defense didn't slowly get worse. It became unenforceable. Look at the numbers. Over the season, Arkansas sat around at 98 defensive rating. Over the last 5 games, that jumps to 114 plus. That kind of drop does not come from talent loss. It comes from breakdowns that aren't getting corrected. Late help rotations, or in some cases, no help rotations. Ball side acting as help side. I believe it was the Missouri game where 63% of points allowed by Arkansas was due to ball side acting like help side and lack of help side disciplines. 63% of points allowed from that. Then you have failed point of attack containment, reactive fouling instead of positional defense, and fly-by closeouts. The worst. On usually the perimeter, or no closeout at all. Those aren't schematic issues, they're standards issues. When there's no sub-leverage left, standards stop being enforceable. Even the players even if the players are trying. Effort doesn't fix that. Energy doesn't fix that. Only structure does. Now, let's be clear about one thing. Pace is not the cause of the collapse. It is the accelerant. Arkansas kept 4 things in place at the same time. They kept elite pace. They increased it. They had declining defensive execution. Their turnover rate was climbing, and the rotation was shortening. They were playing faster, harder, players getting less minutes from the bench. Then we have the turnover rate climbing, defensive execution declining. That combination is lethal. Fast pace only works if you have a few things. You need defense to be connected, communicate, and work together as a system, as a team. Turnovers have to be controlled. We have 0 for 2 right now. And the bench has to absorb some minutes so players don't get fatigued. So we're 0 for 3. Over the last 5 games, none of those held. Defense was disconnected. I have seen several switches that were not communicated. It's not like they're playing at Allen Fieldhouse, where they might not be able to hear each other. If they communicated, they can hear each other. And I want to point out that Rodriguez and Golia, I love them defensively. I think they're great players, but what I like especially defensively is that they communicate. They talk defensively. And they're not getting as much minutes as they should. So pace stopped creating an advantage. I don't think really the increasing pace ever really created an advantage for Arkansas. But it did start magnifying damage. Every mistake didn't just cost a possession, it multiplied into the next one. And if I didn't say this before, I just want to repeat it again. Again, pace is different than transition offense. Pace is the number of possessions in a game. Transition offense is when there's advantage created before defensive is set. So sprinting for sprinting is not going to give you an advantage. Why this shows up in conference play. And this is why we see this clearly here, because the pattern doesn't change game from game. LSU, Kentucky, Missouri, Georgia, different opponents, different style of play. We have the same arc. Arkansas is competitive early, then the enforcement slips, usually late second quarter in some cases. The last couple of games, it's been third quarter. This last game at home, it was late third quarter and into the fourth. One run becomes 2, and it stacks from there. There's no reset available if you're not using your bench, utilizing your bench. And the margin balloons. That's not because those teams are suddenly figuring something out. They didn't just magically get better at the end of the third. Kentucky didn't just magically get better. They utilized their bench better, for one. And it's not matchup variance. It's structure fragility. That's why we're seeing this over several games and against different opponents with different different play styles. When standards aren't enforced early, there's no mechanism to reassert them late. Conference teams don't need to dominate. In the SEC, teams don't need to dominate the game to win, to beat Arkansas. They just have to wait. So when you zoom out, this isn't a mystery. Arkansas' season isn't going downhill because they became less talented. Arkansas has all the talent they need. It isn't because players stopped competing. And it isn't because the win conditions were unclear. This season is sliding because structure never stabilized. Defensive standards weren't enforced consistently. The bench stopped being used as leverage. Minutes concentrated. And pace kept rising without control. Once that happened, there was no mechanism left to stop mistakes from stacking. Not because players didn't care, but because accountability requires tools, and those tools were gone. And that is how you get competitive stretches that don't last. That's how one run becomes 2, 3, and so on. And it's how margins balloon even when parts of the plan are working. This isn't about blame, it's about alignment. Fast teams need depth. Depth requires trust, and trust has to be paired with standards that are enforceable for 40 minutes. That's the lesson of this stretch. And it's the context you need before looking at what comes next. In the next episode, we'll go game by game through this recent stretch, what actually mattered, where the spiral started, and what can realistically be corrected. Then we'll turn the page and preview the Missouri game, not with over-optimism or panic, but with clarity. Talent still isn't the question. Effort still isn't the debate. Structure is. This is the Metricality, where I talk data, not vibes.